Hello everybody and welcome back to Miniature Hub and another How to Play a Song of Ice and Fire the Miniatures game. Today I'm going to be going over the charge action in the activation phase, and I'm going to explain how to do it, and then I'll do a demonstration to show you guys. So first, for your unit to be able to form a charge action, your unit cannot be engaged with another enemy, and your unit must have a valid target. So to have a valid target, the enemy you want to charge must be in line of sight, and the line of sight arc of the enemy unit must at least have space for your unit to be 50% aligned, which essentially means that 50% aligned means like half of the tray can be engaged, like that. And if I couldn't engage half, say like for some reason terrain was obstructing the bear riders and I could only engage like that, that's an invalid target, which means you wouldn't actually be able to target them. Also, you must be within the maximum charge distance, which essentially is your speed stat plus 6. Which I'll explain later, but basically if, like for instance, these Stark Outriders, they are movement of 6, which means 6 plus 6 is 12. So if a unit was 13 inches away, they wouldn't be able to target them. But I'll explain that shortly. So there are 5 steps when performing a charge action, a little bit shorter than resolving an attack, but you do actually have to resolve attack afterwards anyway. That's the whole point of a charge, is to engage the enemy and then do an attack. So, step 1, you've got to determine the line of sight arc that you're in. So as I've said in a few other videos, you basically have these 4 arcs on your unit tray, which are determined by these little grooves here. You've got the front, you've got the 2 flanks on either side of the tray, and then you have the rear, which is back here. The line of sight arc of your enemy is essentially the majority of the tray in that arc. So the front arc here basically comes out like that, and then it will come out like that from that direction. Right now, these Stark Outriders are in the front arc of the Frozen Shore Bear Riders. If I move them to like here, which you may not be able to see on the camera, but if they were like that, for example, they're in the flank arc, and then if I move them all the way around to the back, they will be in the rear arc. And that's important because when you're determining the line of sight arc that you're basically charging into, when you charge into, that's essentially the side of the tray you're going to put your units in. And that's like charging from the rear and the flank can give you certain bonuses, which I'll go over later in the video. So generally speaking, you want to try and flank in the rear and in the flanks. Charge in the flanks and the rear, but obviously there are certain scenarios where that may not be beneficial, because sometimes you can swing around the back of an enemy, charge them in the rear, but then that may leave you open to all sorts of things. So it's all about strategy, but charging in the flanks and the rear, generally speaking, is where you'd want to go if possible. So there's just a few things when determining the line of sight. If you're like in 2 arcs, essentially, like if your tray's like here in between, you choose the majority rules. So if over 50% of your tray is in the flank arc, then you go into the flank. If it's dead on 50-50, and then the attacker, well, you as the attacker can choose which arc you want to go into. Step 2 is pivot the attacker, which the attacker can pivot as long as the targeted enemy remains in line of sight and will potentially be able to contact the enemy during its move. Basically means that if like my Outriders were facing that weird direction, something like that, I could then pivot them to face the Bear Riders, because like I can still determine line of sight, because I can still, it's not about the way I'm facing with determining the arc, because I can still see them technically, and then I can pivot into the direction I want to charge forward in. Because when they were like this, even though I'm not necessarily looking at them, I can still see them and I can charge. I'm still in that front arc of the Bear Riders. The pivot it's just like a nice thing, just to allow you to it's just more for aesthetics, really, just to look like you're going in that direction. And then obviously when I move forward, it will look like I'll be able to make contact with them. So step 3 is roll the charge distance dice and then move your unit. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to roll a d6, and then the d6 plus your speed stat. So for these Stark Outriders it's 6, so if I roll a d6 plus the speed stat, you then move directly forward that distance, so as much as possible. You're essentially trying to get to your enemy unit, which in this case is the Bear Riders. You want to get as close to them as possible. So if I rolled, I don't actually think I'd need to get much distance here. Basically on 6, all I'd need is like a roll of 1, which, you know, is guaranteed. So I'll basically know I'll make it. But say they were like 10 inches away, I'd roll the d6 and I'd hope to get 4 in order to make the 10. There are quite a few things that can go wrong, however, with a charge. You basically move directly forward, so that's sort of why you pivot, because you move in the direction of the pivot. You move directly forward, and if you encounter a unit or piece of terrain that cannot be crossed, you have to stop within 1 inch of it. And that basically means you sort of fail the charge. So if you do not contact the desired unit, either by rolling too low, because if you roll too low, you may not reach the distance anyway, or by contacting like a unit that you can't pass, or a piece of terrain you can't pass, then you result in a failed charge, which I'll go over shortly. Even if you roll a 1 on your d6, you suffer a disorderly charge, which is different to a failed charge. It's a different sort of effect that you get. You can still have made it to the enemy, so my Stark Outriders could have still made it to the Bear Riders, but if I rolled a 1, they suffer a disorderly charge. And then obviously if you contact the unit, it is a successful, so as long as you don't roll a 1, and as long as you don't not make it to the unit, you gain a successful charge, which is very good. So step 4 is aligning with the enemy. So once you reach the enemy on a successful charge, you align the attacker's tray, so your tray, to either 50% or 100% of the defender in the targeted line of sight. Which basically means if I reach these Bear Riders, these Stark Outriders can either align 50-50 like that, or they could align 100% like that. So you could line 50-50 to allow another unit to engage, or you could allow align 100% to not allow anyone else to potentially engage you from an easier angle. So I'm just going to bring these back there. So step 5 is perform 1 melee attack. It's not a separate action doing a melee attack, it's part of the charge action. The whole point of the charge action is to move into the enemy and then do a hit. So after you've done all the movement and you've aligned with the enemy, you then perform 1 melee attack. I'm going to quickly explain what a disorderly charge and a failed charge mean. So a disorderly charge means that you do not receive the charge bonus, and the attacker may not play tactics cards for the remainder of the turn. So if you can remember, the disorderly charge is basically rolling a 1. So generally speaking, you have successfully charged the unit, but you do not get the charge bonus, and you cannot play tactics cards for the remainder of the turn. So it is like a bit of a penalty. A failed charge means that you haven't even got to the attacker, you haven't even engaged, you haven't even, got to the enemy, and the attacker hasn't made it. So it means the attacker suffers a panic test, and then your activation is immediately over. So if you do not get to your desired target, you suffer a panic test, and then your activation just stops. Then there's the combat bonuses, which are the charge bonus, the flank bonus, and the rear bonus. So the charge bonus is your melee attack that occurs after the charge. You get to re-roll all attack dice, which is quite handy. It's quite nice. So you really want to get that charge bonus if possible. The charge bonus only applies to that melee attack that's after the charge. Any other melee attacks that you may do not count for a charge bonus. So it's just for that one melee attack. The flank bonus is basically when you engage in the flank. As I said, you get some cool perks. So for any melee or ranged attack, because this counts for not necessarily just a charge, but if you are shooting into someone's flank or rear, or just giving a general melee attack into someone's flank or rear, you still get this bonus. So melee or ranged attacks in the flank cause the defenders to suffer -1 to defense dice rolls and -1 to panic tests, which is very nice. But then if you get it in the rear, this also applies for melee and ranged attacks that are not necessarily from a charge. You get -2 to defense dice rolls and -2 to panic test rolls. So essentially it's just like amplifying. You get a decent bonus if you charge in the flank or attack in the flank or shoot in the flank, and then you get an even better one if you do it in the rear. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration. I'm going to use the Stark Outriders as my attacking unit. They're not engaged, and they have a valid target, which is pretty much right in front of them. Determining the line of sight arc, they are currently in the front arc, so they'll be charging into the bear's front arc. Then I would pivot them, but they are pretty much just like dead on, so I'm just going to leave them like that. Now I'm going to roll the charge distance dice. So I'm just going to take a d6 and roll it. I got a 2, which is not a 1, so that's dandy for me. I'm going to take that 2 and add it to my 6, which means 8. And I do believe I am in plenty of distance to charge them. So I could charge up to this 8 over here, but I don't need to. So I'm just going to engage fully. I'm going to align 100% with the bear riders, just so no one else can attempt to engage me in that 50% gap. And then I would perform my 1 melee attack, which I'm not going to do. But if you would like to see how a melee attack is performed, go and check out my melee attack action, which covers melee attacks and ranged attacks, how to resolve them, and all that good stuff. Actually, one of the things I did not go over in my attacking video was attack abilities, which are essentially like tags that are attached to a unit's weapon that give them certain effects when attacking. For example, the Frozen Shore Bear Riders over here actually have 3 of the 4 tags on their main weapon. They have Precision, Sundering, and Vicious, which is nice to have all 3. The only one they're missing is Critical Blow. So I'm just going to go over each one quickly. They're quite simple. They're just like extra bonuses. They're very easy to learn. So Critical Blow. For each attack die rolled of 6, so when you roll your attack dice, for each 6 you roll, the defender suffers +1 hit, which basically means they could potentially suffer more wounds. So Precision, for each attack die roll of 6, the enemy does not roll a defense dice and suffers 1 wound instantly. So when you roll your attack dice, for every 6, the enemy does not roll a defense dice for it, and it just suffers a wound straight away. If you play like Warhammer Age of Sigmar, it's essentially like a mortal wound, I think, from what I can remember. It's essentially the wound just goes through straight away. There's no defense dice rolls for it. For Sundering, defenders suffer -1 to defense die roll, which is quite nice. It can really be quite brutal on certain units, especially units that have like a 6+ armor save. If you got Sundering and it's -1, you can just cleave through them really quickly. The last one is Vicious. So if your weapon has Vicious, the defender suffers -2 to their panic test roll, which is also quite nice for certain units that have already a pretty bad morale. Then with like the Vicious and a -2, it just stacks even more and it's just even more brutal. So you definitely want to look at what keywords your units have, and you want to, because you can look at the enemy units on the battlefield. You can ask to look at their unit cards in a game, and then you can see which ones have low morale, which ones have really low defense, or maybe even units that have really high morale and high defense. You may want to use your sundering units to try and get through those really beefy tanks. There's all sorts of tactics you can try and use. But thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this charge video. I think the next one I'm going to do for the How to Play series is the retreat action. And then after that, I'm going to start talking about NCUs, commanders, tactics cards, orders, lots of other cool stuff, as well as doing some other videos to spice it up a bit. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye!